All right, welcome. So, everybody, to How to Write a Scientific Abstract. I'm Andrea Jacobo from the Latinx Young Professional Committee for Latino Caucus for Public Health. The main thing for our presentation and webinar for today is that we want to develop young professionals to make sure that the future of public health, especially in regards to Latinx health or Latino and Latina health, is at the forefront. And we want to make sure that we're developing individuals to be researchers, public health practitioners, but also to contribute to academia and the research. So we have a great presentation by Irene Martinez. She's at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Her research interests are community-based participatory research, racial and ethnic health disparities, Latinx health, immigration, mixed method, and health policy. So thank you so much for being here, Irene. Let's get started with the presentation. Go ahead, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you so much, Andrea, for this idea. I think it's a great idea because I think when I first submitted an abstract, oh my Lord, like in 2010, yeah, it's been 10 years since I submitted my first abstract to APHA. I really didn't know. I'd been historically submitting abstracts to other conferences, and definitely the format is a lot more organized and there's a little bit more that's asked of you besides submitting the abstract, such as including learning objectives, which we'll cover in the presentation. And I'm really happy to be a part of the Latino Caucus because I think that the Young Professionals Network is a really great place for people who are thinking of maybe entering academia or thinking of going into public health. It's a really nice space to really get mentorship. And like I feel either from peers, people in the same position as you, or people in different positions, like either, you know, they are already in public health or already have a PhD or DRPH or a doctor in public health also. So I think this is really great. And I wish this had existed when I started submitting abstracts to APHA 10 years ago. Do you want to go ahead and talk a little bit about the LCPH mentorship program, Andrea?
Yes, of course. So the LCPH, basically, what we're trying to do is create a network of mentors and mentees in which we're creating a sustainable pipeline of qualified, diverse public health leaders by building one-on-one coaching dyads between early career to a seasoned Latinx health professional. And what that really means is basically we're pairing higher level public health practitioners with those who are just starting with their career. For example, Irene is mentor to Eric Ruiz, who's also on the call, and they've been working with each other to get Eric into a PhD program. Now, Eric is doing all the work, but Irene is supporting him. Irene is supporting him in this process. And earlier, we were just having a conversation of how the interview process how it went. So those are the conversations that we want to have within the caucus, as well as on webinars, and making sure that you are supported throughout this process. Not many of us have, our parents never went through this process. We don't know how to, let's say, for example, that's why we wanted to do this webinar, how to submit an abstract, or how do I interview, and what makes me a great candidate. And so this is what we want to do with the mentorship program. Andrea Medeiros is also on the call. She's our co-chair for the Latinx Young Professional Committee, and she is awesome. And we work together with the rest of the team to make this happen. So again, thank you so much for being a part of the webinar today.
Okay, I'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Yeah, and if anyone, I know this is being recorded, but anyone who listens to this webinar later, I think you should take great interest in maybe joining the mentorship program or taking advantage of other opportunities through the Young Professionals Network. And I love the fact that your whole goal is to really demystify the process, because I feel like a lot of these processes are, you know, because you don't know someone who's done it, you don't really know, should I do it? Am I qualified to do it? Of course you can. Anybody can submit an abstract to APHA. It's not just for academics, but it's also for people who are practitioners, people who are in departments of public health, local, state, or national. Yeah, and anyone who's doing any type of public health intervention or who are community health workers and the like. So I'll go ahead and start a little bit with the organization of the webinar today. Well, I want to go through the APHA abstract submission process. It's a little bit daunting, and I think what often happens, and it has also changed between this year and last, So I want to go ahead and provide an example with actually, I found it, my very first abstract that I submitted to APHA in 2010 for the 2011 meetings, or yeah, in 2011 for the 2011 meetings in Denver. So I'll go ahead and give that, use it as an example and upload it onto the system so that you will have an example of how to do that on your own and see where there are common mistakes where people often don't hit a certain button or don't fill out a certain field. And then, yeah, then we run into problems where your abstract won't be reviewed. Okay, and then we'll talk a little bit about how are abstracts reviewed. I think that part is really important because even until I joined the scientific committee, I really didn't even know how abstracts were scored. And I think that if you know how people are reviewing your abstract, then you'll actually get a better idea of how, like, what information do you need in this abstract in order for it to be reviewed and for it to have a favorable score to move forward into a presentation. I'll go ahead and make some recommendations. So these were made both with the other scientific co-chair who couldn't be here today, Barbara Vaquero, who's at the University of Washington, and myself came up with a list of best practices for submitting your APHA abstracts. We think that this will guarantee that you at least get reviewed, and not only get reviewed, but that you'll actually receive a favorable score from your reviewers. And we'll talk a little bit about that too, how many people review your abstracts, how we decide ultimately which abstracts make it into the program. And there are times where we've actually had wonderful abstracts, but we just couldn't find a home for it. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. And then we'll have frequently asked questions, or FAQs, that we often get over email throughout the course of APHA season, whether it's during the submission process or even after, when we are deciding what will make it into the program. Okay. So in terms of the APHA abstract submission process, there's basically two active links that you can use when you make your submission. So one is usually going through the direct caucus, special interest group, or section at APHA. They usually have a link with a call for abstracts. And for some of you who are part of listservs in public health, such as the Spirit of 1848, people often even email announcements, or even for the Latino Caucus, we have a newsletter, we include a link. So often the sections, caucuses, SPIGs, and sections often have their own links that they advertise in their own network. So you could always use that link. That's the one I'm going to use for the example. Or you can also go, so I'll just open both of them so that you see. You can also submit it through the APHA website. The thing with the APHA website, though, is that you would have to go, so it's a lot of information that you're getting here. So when you go to call for abstracts, you have to go through more steps. But if you go straight to, oops, now I don't know where the slides. Get to the slides, Andrea. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's you have to exit the full screen mode.
Oh, okay.
Just exit the full screen mode, and then you should be.
There we go. Okay. Sorry, that was a dinosaur move.
It's okay. Don't worry.
Okay, so I think it's a little busier when you do it straight from the APHA meeting website, because you have to go through all this information. But if you go straight to the actual caucus, SPIG, or sections website, they have their call for abstracts, which describes like what's this year's theme, what are areas that we're interested in having presentations on. And then at the very, very bottom, you see very tiny here, start abstract submission. That's where you can start your abstract submission process. And just know that each of the sections, caucuses, and special interest groups, or SPIGs, they each have a page like this where they have their call for abstracts. And we'll talk a little bit more later about, like, even though they have a special call and they're looking for, and they strongly encourage certain abstracts, it doesn't mean that you can't submit an abstract, even if your topic isn't necessarily presented there. And I'll give you an example of why. So let's go ahead and start this abstract submission process using an old abstract from the very first time that I actually went to APHA. So because I'm starting from the Latino Caucus's announcement or call for abstract, it has here the areas that I would be interested in submitting, or where I think my abstract would best fit in. So the current abstract that I'm going to upload is actually on an occupational health needs assessment of Latino day laborers in Baltimore that we started many years ago in Baltimore. And so for me, I think one of the areas that I could potentially place my abstract in is current and emerging Latinx health issues. That's just really broad. So we have that there as a placeholder in case people's public health research or projects or programs don't fit in any of the other areas that we're actually really interested in, such as borders and migrant health, ethnic and racial discrimination across the lifespan, gender, sexuality, and racial minority health, interventions that address and advance health equity, the public health young professionals. So also know that historically we've always included a session, specifically a poster session for the public health young professionals. So we do have a poster session just dedicated to the public health young professionals, which you could submit to, and that's not limited to a topic area. We have one on symbolic violence, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to choose current and emerging Latinx health issues because my areas, the project that I want to submit to isn't necessarily congruent with the other areas. So I press save and continue. Oops, okay. I hope that works. Okay, it did. Okay, so this is assuming that you've submitted onto the APHA system before. So you just enter your username and password. If you haven't had that, it'll give you prompts in order for you to sign in as a user. But typically, if you're a current member of APHA, you shouldn't have a problem, but you don't have to be a member of APHA to submit an abstract. So that's a very important piece of information you should know. So for this abstract, let's see, the title was, well, let me see, I'm trying to look for this abstract now. Because typically what you want to do is that you want to keep the abstract open in the background while you. I'm just going to move this because I want to see my. Okay, I want to see the abstract. I don't know. How can I share my abstract with people, Andrea? How do I share Word, for example?
May have to share another screen. So right now you're sharing your website. So then if you go to the bottom where you originally shared your screen, go ahead and hit that button again so that you can share your Word instead of the website.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you do that, it'll give you a drop down menu, or you could just generally your screen, and that way you can have both at the same time.
Well, you can still see the actual APHA submission screen, right?
We can.
Okay, then I think I can do this. Yeah, because now I found my screen. All right, I found the Word. Okay, so here, so usually what you do is that you have your notes document already open, and then you copy and paste into each of the fields. You ensure that way that you don't have as many errors, and you have the spell check on in the program, in your word processing program. So here I just copy and pasted the title, occupational health hazards among Latino immigrant workers in Baltimore. And even it gives you, they're very strict at APHA about the case. So make sure that you copy the case, right? That only it's capitalized in the first letter of your title, and that the rest is pretty much lowercase, except if, of course, if you start with a colon and you should capitalize the first letter again. So then here you would include your email. I'll include mine. Let's see. And then preferred presentation format. I think this is really important because sometimes this helps us actually organize the program, and also it's what you prefer. So let's say you have, that you really want feedback on your presentation. You may want to consider something like a roundtable. So actually I had a slide on this, but I might as well go ahead and talk about this now. So there are 3 formats that you can submit. So one is an oral presentation, which is basically when you're on a panel with 4 people, you have about 12 minutes to present. And then at the end, you have questions from the audience. This is the typical format of most conferences. But one of the formats that we get many slots for, and that has actually been very positive responses in the past, have been the roundtable presentation. So there's anywhere from 6 to 8 people presenting either a paper, or they talk about a particular public health intervention, and you have a discussion with people who come to your table. And you can get really useful feedback on your paper or on your project. So this is a more interactive session. And people rotate to your table. So you get multiple different people coming to your table to talk about your project or research. And then the poster presentation is basically a visual presentation of your project or your research, and you have an hour that you're in the conference center or exhibit hall to talk about your research. I think posters are really great also for people who are new to coming to APHA meetings, or people who want to have, again, feedback on their work. Like, I feel like posters and roundtables are really great if you want feedback on your work and you want advice, or you even want to find collaborators for your work. Okay, so here I would prefer, so for this particular presentation, let's say I prefer a poster because it's a works in progress, and I want to do that. But you also have the option of doing no preference, right? And so then you give the organizer of the session, you give them leeway in terms of oral preferred, or poster. So so I'm just going to put no preference. External funding, if you have any type of external funding from a foundation or the National Institutes of Health or CDC, you should actually indicate this. If you have nothing to report, then just leave it blank. For this particular study, I didn't have any specific, actually I did have funding. It was from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. We'll just leave it like that. Okay, target audiences. The purpose of this abstract or paper should meet the needs of a target audience. So here you would say whether you're trying to target like community health educators, physicians involved in doing HIV/AIDS policymaking, social workers, etc. So here I would say public health practitioners working with Latinx day laborers. Okay, and you can have more than that. That's just an example. Okay, so the keyword that I would use here is occupational health. Let's see, yeah, occupational health and safety, because it was on day laborers and occupational health and safety. And then immigrant health. Yeah, and if you don't find your exact keyword, just find something that's close enough. It's important that you include all of the fields in the process. And then here is a really important section, comments to organizers. So let's say you have special needs for your presentation, or you're hard of hearing, for example, or you have visual needs. You can make those requests here. Let's say that you're in the process of finishing a project, and you don't have full results yet. You can indicate this, comments to organizers. You can also, we've had people who are coming from the same lab or the same research group, and they want to present on the same panel, or at least in the same poster or roundtable session. This is going to be the place where you communicate to people like Barbara and myself, or other scientific co-chairs for other sections, caucuses, and whether or not you want those things. Of this space to communicate with your reviewer and the organizers of APHA. It's super helpful. And then here, this is if you're using the off-label investigational use. This is if you're using like a product. And this is, yeah. And so, I mean, but that's very rare that we ever get anything like this, that someone's using an unlabeled product or a product that's under investigational use. This is more common for randomized clinical trials. And then if you have a website for your presentation, you could enter it here, but we don't, so we'll save it. Okay, save. Okay, so now you're moving on to learning areas. So you have to pick the learning areas. They're basically for continuing education credit. So what happens is that, so a lot of people when they finish either their medical degree, their nursing degree, or their any type of certification, they often want to get continuing education credits. And this is where people's abstracts usually get lost in the mix and never get reviewed, because they don't actually choose what are potential learning areas in this step only. We'll talk about more like how you write them out, but here you should choose. So I think for this particular project, because we were looking at occupational health and day laborers, that we would actually choose, let's see, occupational health and safety is one of the learning areas that we had, public health or related education, or let's see. Yeah, we definitely have public health. Let me see. Yeah, public health and related education and provision of care. Okay, we'll save and continue. And then for health indicators, let's see. It was definitely gender was one of the aspects that we were looking at in that project. public safety, and the social determinants, and whatever else you communicate up to 3 for this area, but make sure that you click on at least one. Okay. There we go. I almost didn't hit save. Okay, so then you save, and then the learning outcomes. And so I have a slide about this, but I will go through it really quickly. Basically, you need to indicate what are the learning outcomes from your presentation or your abstract, and you need to have at least 3 outcomes. So, and the reason why continuing education is important is because it actually increases the number of people who come to your session. So that's why maybe sometimes a session only has 2 people, is because we didn't indicate clearly what are the learning outcomes. So we don't get people who want credit for continuing education. So it's really important that you keep this. And when you don't have the learning outcomes, there's a chance that either your abstract won't be submitted, or that we have to go ahead and create those outcomes for you. So let's say you have a wonderful abstract. So then Barbara and I would have to come up with those learning outcomes. And you don't want someone else writing on your behalf. But the problem is that we can't actually get credit for the session if it doesn't have all of the learning outcomes complete. So of course I have so I have my abstract open in another window, but I've just pasted in one of my learning outcomes. To differentiate the types of occupational injury and illness hazards among Latino immigrants in Baltimore by gender, previous occupation, and types of jobs. And so we'll go through the learning outcomes, but just know that when you start this, that you use one of these action words when you start your outcome: analyze, assess, compare, define, demonstrate, describe, design, differentiate. So I use the word differentiate. So we'll go ahead and add another outcome. You need to have at least 1, but no more than 3. So at least include 1 learning outcome. Okay, and then objective number 2, after attending this presentation, people should be able to compare occupational health hazards of Latinos in Baltimore, a new destination to Latino immigrants in US cities with more established populations. And I'll add another outcome just because I did have 3 for this particular abstract. And the last one was to assess how immigrant status can hinder or enable the amount of occupational health and safety information and protection offered to immigrants. Okay, we'll press save. All right, so I have to add people. Just for the sake of time, I'll add myself only, but you have to add every single person who's on your presentation and their email addresses. So have that ready. Every single person's name, every single person's affiliation, and email address. In the interest of time, I will just do that's my personal email. I'll do just my information, just as an example. Yeah, so there I am. So when you enter your name, you can select it. If you're not there, no worries. You could always select and edit. You could always just add your name, because remember, you don't have to be a member of APHA to submit. You have to be a member when your abstract is accepted. Okay, so you can add a new person here. We'll just add a new person as an example. Here I'll add my community partner, who was Abdel Piedra Martel at the Casa de Maryland. At casamd.org. See, so this is what happens. If the person isn't a current member of APHA, then you have to fill out all of their information. So you want to make sure that you have all their credentials and that you have email addresses. If they have a membership number, that you have this information. So right now, let me save and continue. Well, let me see. Can I add this? Yes. I don't have one. And okay, save and continue. Oh, you're not going to let me keep going? So this is a good example of why you have to keep going. You have to actually fill out all of the fields. I'll just put my personal email just as an example. Okay, this one. Oh, here we go. He's a services coordinator. Okay. Worker center. I'm just filling this out to make sure it's done and we get through the process. Okay, Maryland. Zip code like 257, and then
This is important.
putting. Sorry, I'm just putting a phone number.
It's okay. I think this is important because this is how they're going to contact you in terms of once, depending on if your abstract has been submitted, accepted or not. So it's really important to fill out the email portion as clear as.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
the primary way that we communicate with people is with the email that you actually place inside of the APHA abstract submission system. So this has happened to us before where people call us, we'll get our phones blown up the day before the actual deadline, which is February 20th this year for our caucus. For different sections, it's a few days after or before, but just know for ours, it's February 20th, but people call us all the time, but it's because they entered the email address wrong. And then we have to actually cull through the system and find it for them. So yeah, it would be really great if you could enter this information as correctly as possible. So here you can move the order of your author. So I can make Abdel the first author, and you could still be the presenter. It doesn't matter. You can change the order, but the person who will be the presenter will be the person who actually presents at APHA. So the next step is disclosure. And this is a super important step that so many people miss. And so basically you're disclosing whether you have any financial conflicts of interest, right? Or if you have a personal conflict of interest. So let's say that I was related to Benjamin to the president or of APHA or something, then yeah, that would not work. You should disclose it, right? So what you want to do is that you want to indicate whether or not, I would say 99 times out of 100, very few people actually have anything to disclose. So I have to go ahead and click here. Yeah. I have to click on my disclosures and make sure, yeah. And so here this is really important. So you're gonna write here, why are you qualified to be an abstract author? So I typically would just write, oh, I'm qualified to do this because I'm the PI on this project, right? I'm the principal investigator, I'm supervising it. But in reality, what APHA is looking for is the number of years, like a quantity. Remember, this is account for continuing education. So you want to be able to say, I am a researcher with 15 years of experience conducting community-based research, or I'll say community-based occupational health research with underserved populations, right? And yeah, you could write as much as you want. It's limited up to 75 words, but they really want some sort of quantitative measure. I have X amount of, even if it's months, that you actually indicate I have this much time and it's in this specific area. And that's what makes you qualified to be the presenter and to be responsible to execute information to people seeking continuing education. And then here, this is when you disclose, so during the past 12 months, have you or your spouse or partner had a financial, professional, or personal relationship that might potentially bias and or impact the content of your session? So even if you say yes, it's not the end of the world. It doesn't mean that let's say you do know the president of APHA and you're related to them. It's not at the end of the world. You could still your abstract will still be reviewed. You just have to indicate what type of relationship you have. Okay, as long as you're transparent, that's the name of the game. But for this specific case, we didn't have any disclosures. And you have to agree not to promote any products, goods, or services that'll create a bias in your presentation. So your signature is kind of electronic for this situation. But remember, please fill out this section. Please indicate some sort of quantitative number of years of experience for why you're qualified to present the abstract. Okay, so it's completed. Yay, I can go to the next step. Okay, so here I'm going to copy and paste the abstract text. So I can't believe it. Yes, it's true. that you have to do all of this work before you even actually get to your science or to the part where you're going to present or present your abstract. Okay, so I just copied and pasted. I generally you would write this abstract and get feedback from other people before you actually submit it, and that's going to be in my best practices slide. But yeah, you want to limit it to 250 words, and we'll talk more about the content soon. But I just wanted to give you guys an example or an idea of what the abstract submission process is like. Yeah, so it says here, do not include the abstract title, do not include the names of the authors, because remember, you already put that somewhere else in the submission fields. Do not add trade or brand names, right? So one of my collaborators is Douglas Granger, and he's the founder of Salimetrics, which is a company that specializes in using saliva as biospecimens. Yeah, we use Salimetrics items, but we're not supposed to actually put them in the abstract, because then it would seem like we're creating a bias, right? We're giving them marketing for free through APHA. So that's an example of also when you have to claim, when you have to disclose a financial relationship, right? Because my co-author is the CEO of that company. So here you go. Currently, your submission is incomplete. You must upload at least one abstract, and you've copied and pasted text. My copy and pasted text document was, since it is invalid, the text below is not saved. Okay, so let's go ahead and save it. Maybe this will work now. Oh, it's not working. Oh, because guess what? I'm over the limit. Okay, so in the real world, I would go ahead and edit that. But right now, I'm just going to take out a few sentences. In the real world, you would edit it, right? You go back to your co-authors and edit it. But for right now, for this educational purposes, we'll just cut some stuff out from the bottom. But yeah, so pay attention to that. So then here you'll have the opportunity to review your submission. So here I have the title, the names, I indicate that I'll be the presenter. I have our affiliations, the abstract, you read through it, see if it's what you want, your title, the email address of the main person who should be the contact, your learning outcomes. And yeah, and so once you go through this, you make sure all of the fields are submitted. Ooh, so we have this little question here, student. So earlier when I was filling out my information, well, because I'm already a member of APHA for many years, I'm no longer on student status, but there is a question there asking whether you're a student. You want to make sure that if you are a student or if you're part of the Young Professionals Network that you click yes, because we actually have the Latino Caucus has an student paper award, and we'll ask year, and we give you both a monetary recognition and a really nice recognition during our award ceremony. So that's something you should keep in mind. Also, if you are a member of the Young Professionals, remember that little field where it says notes to organizers? You can type that in there, that you're part of the Young Professionals Network, because then that way we also know if you want to really be in the Young Professionals session too. It gives us like 2 places where we know this. Okay, so you could either print the page. I usually like taking a screenshot of it just so that I know the confirmation number and I know that it's been submitted. So here's the ID number. So when you communicate with us, you may want to keep this in mind. When you communicate to APHA for anything, this is going to be the ID number of your submission. But I like to do either save the page or do a screenshot. So okay, let's get back to the slides. How do I exit full screen? So then I have to start over again, right?
Oh, no, you don't.
Okay, there you go. Yay. Okay, so we talked about this. Does anyone have any questions so far? The oral sessions, roundtable sessions, and poster session. But one thing that I want to add about the oral sessions is that we really try as hard as possible to reserve these for people reporting research results or giving us new theoretical concepts, right? If they're giving us new tools to do Latinx health research, we really try to reserve it for that, because that's where we get the most people to come to our sessions, and we want to really move the field forward. So that's just something to know. Okay. And so, so we did it together. I'm so glad I did that. This is a new system, so it's not so cumbersome, but it's still pretty detailed. Okay, now, how are abstracts reviewed? And I think this is really important. So you get anywhere from a 0 to a 55, with a 31 to 41 being neutral, a 42 to 50 being good, and a 51 to 55 being real good. or very good. So typically, I think our abstracts are between a 31 to a 50. So that's pretty good. And even when people have sometimes a lower score, we actually go back and review the reviewer scores and see, you know, were they reviewed fairly? Because let's say we actually think an abstract is really nice, or that we think, yeah, we actually go back and we will break the tie. Like Barbara and I will, because we actually think that the information is important. So just know that even if you do have a quantitative score and it is blinded. So you'll have 3 reviewers reviewing each of your abstracts. And so there are people who do not see your name. It is completely blinded. The only people, if we really are, like the organizers can find out who the names are of both the reviewers and the actual people submit, but we really try to stick to the quantitative criteria. So when reviewers get the abstract, they have 3 recommendations that they give us. They rate it as accept, you should accept this; decline, you should not consider it at all for the program; or we waitlist you, or the person recommends waitlist. So 3 people, 3 reviewers. And so we've rarely had waitlists. We generally accept people. We do have a decline list too, but for the most part, we try to give everyone a shot at presenting. And not some big caucuses are different because they get way more abstracts than we do. But on average, I mean, last year we had about 200 plus submissions. So yeah, but most people we tried to give at least a poster, because we think, especially if we think that the research is cutting edge or the program is really innovative in terms of promoting health equity in Latinx population. So this is the grading system. So the actual abstract content, there's a maximum of 15 points. Learning outcomes. So remember those learning outcomes with the action verbs? We actually grade those too. So your reviewer will have to assess whether or not you actually have measurable learning outcomes. The gap, is there a gap that you've identified? So, you know, make sure that in your abstract that you say, oh, okay, no one has done research on this, or there's very little research that demonstrates a relationship between X and Y. Be able to identify the gap, because that actually makes it makes the point about why your research is significant, or your program or your project is important. Okay, competencies. So there are 10 core competencies in public health. I have them in the next slide. And then what you want to do is you want to make sure if your abstract addresses one of the core competencies in public health, nursing, medicine, or health education. So I have the ones for public health in another slide. But just think about that. I didn't even know that this was one of the criteria that they use. So that's something to really consider. And then the quality of the written abstract. So yeah, make sure that they're minimal type. One of the ways that you could actually address a lot of this, you know, to make sure that the quality is good, whether you've addressed a gap or not, and whether the content is really specific to what you're presenting, is have someone else read your work before you submit it. I know it's scary to give people your drafts, but it's totally worth it. Like if a regular person doesn't understand what you have in your abstract, then maybe you should reconsider and make it a little bit easier, because we try to match reviewers to people's topic areas or the keywords, but oftentimes you'll get one person who maybe isn't in your area of, you know, public health practice or research. So just make sure that it's as clear as possible. Okay, and then also the qualification statement. So remember, you have to say, you know, did the presenter clearly describe their qualification and their area of expertise, right? So yeah, so they give an example there. So we actually grade people also on this area. Like, are they qualified to give this presentation? And then could lessons be learned and applied in other cases or environment? That's not as important, but just know that these are the criteria that we use. Okay, so best practices. Okay, so number 1, read the call for abstracts. Make sure that you're maybe addressing one of the key themes that want to be addressed, right, for that year. Read the abstract submission instructions. Even though we went through it pretty quickly here, I would just read through them anyways, because there's certain things you should know, right? Like, can I be lead author on more than one abstract in APHA? Well, maybe not. Can I cancel at the last minute? Maybe not either. So there are like basic general rules and instructions about abstract submission that you can get on this website that we have listed on number 2. I think the other thing, number 3, is really have an informative title. give your reviewers a good idea of what the project, program, or research project that you're doing, what it is, right? In the title, like identify the population, what is the health outcome, and what is it that you're doing, right? In the title. Number 4, have at least one clear goal and learning objective in your abstract. So I like to ask myself this question, like, do you want to describe a process, right? So a lot of people ask us, and I think this is the first and most important question, because a lot of people ask us, I'm not doing active research, or I'm not doing experimental design. Can I still submit? Of course you can submit. If you're talking about a public health intervention that you're delivering on the ground, or you're doing program planning and it's gonna, it's supposed to improve health outcomes in Latinx community, or improve information access, or reduce cost or quality, of course you can even describe the intervention, the process, talk about that. Like, what is the objective that you want to share with your audience? Do you want to report research results that will fill a gap in the literature? So that's another thing. Sometimes we've received abstracts for projects that we're like, oh, this person hasn't read the literature because like they haven't filled the gap. Like, several people have conducted this research. So just be really certain that when you're doing a research presentation, you don't have to have the project done, but at least that you've indicated the significance. Like, what is the gap that your research is actually addressing? And the other thing that I think is really important, like, even if you don't have a research project, but let's say you're starting a community-based participatory partnership, or you're starting a community partnership, or you're starting a multinational partnership, and you have lessons that you've learned in the process. We welcome those types of presentations. People want to learn about that. Like, I want to work with maybe undocumented or unaccompanied minors coming through the US-Mexico border. What are things that I should know if I want to work with this population? What are challenges that I may face? So we really do value also, like, do you have a lessons learned paper that can help researchers, clinicians, or public health practitioners on the ground either work with a population or work with a new challenge in doing a certain research or intervention? Number 5, and I think this is the most, for me, this is something that it took a long time for me to learn. Share your work. Have someone review your work before you submit it. If you have a mentor through the Young Professionals Mentorship Program, use them. Ask them, would you mind reviewing my abstract before submission? Number 6, please indicate the public health implications of your work, even if it's a project at the individual level. So what's happened in the past, I have colleagues who are psychologists, and they'll say, well, my abstract that wasn't submitted, or was submitted, was not accepted in APHA. And part of the problem is that there has to be some sort of public health implication or impact about your work. Even if it is an individual level study or a dyadic study, what is it about your project that will help people in public health? What is the public health relevance? So sometimes you could make that the or you could just depression study, indicate in the introduction or your background sentence how many, what is the prevalence of depression in Latinos, or are there health disparities in depression care? Just make it relevant to public health in some way, even if the research is at the individual level. So please check the box to indicate if you're a student. Yeah, because we want to consider you for the Outstanding Student Paper Award. Last year we had 10 papers to consider, and they were all really great. So I just think it's a really good experience for the students to compete for something like this and to have feedback on their work. Yes, right, one learning outcome. So, and that's for the continuing education credit. So the learning outcome, here's a more formal definition. It reflects what the learner will be able to do as a result of participating in your roundtable, oral, or poster session. Okay, and so the verbs that they use, and the only ones you could use, are listed there. So it's explain, demonstrate, analyze, formulate, discuss, compare, differentiate, etc. So you could always come back to this slide, and we have it listed, as you saw, in the instructions during the APHA abstract submission process. So try not to use, and it's like pecado mortal if you use like understand, knowledge, or learn as a measurable outcome. So just know it has to start with an action word, particularly the ones in the list here. Okay, other best practices. Yeah, in your biographical statement, specify your expertise, and if you can, some sort of numeric quantifier to demonstrate your professional experience, right? How many years of experience you have doing something. And number 10, please make sure you complete all the steps. As you saw when I was completing the submission process, I made some boo-boos and it didn't let me finish submitting my abstract because I had too many words or I didn't add my co-author's affiliation. So be wary of the warnings that you get from the system. They're just trying to help you because they're just trying to make sure that you have a complete abstract, and that way we can fully consider your abstract for presentation. And include in the conflict of interest. So remember, you can have a conflict of interest, just disclose it, just be very transparent. It's not that you can't do that. You can absolutely, you could be considered. You just need to be very transparent about the process, both during the abstract submission process, but also in your presentation. Okay, so before I get to the frequently asked questions, I know that other callers have joined the call. Is there any question you may have for me now? Or for others on the phone? On the line? No? Should I just go ahead with the FAQs or no?
I have a question. This is Emily. So I was wondering till when you can make updates to your abstract until the deadline, or you could do it after as well?
You could absolutely, yes, you can make changes to your abstract before the deadline. Yeah. It has happened before. It has happened before where people, it's like, oh my gosh, I submitted the abstract and I made boo-boo. Sometimes we have to actually contact the person who's in charge of the APHA contact system to help us through the process. We know there's a process. We did it once before, but you really, really want to make sure you make any changes before the actual deadline. So for our caucus, the deadline is February 20th. But if it's like a real emergency or with something unforeseen, then yeah, just contact Barbara and I. At the end of the slides, we have our contact information, and we'll jump hoops, yeah, because we don't want someone, because they've made a mistake, not to be considered either. But I would encourage you just like to make any changes or to really just submit the abstract when you know for sure that all of your co-authors and you are very happy with what you want to submit. Because then it becomes a really cumbersome process on both APHA, Confex, and ourselves to kind of search for your abstract. And then people will ask us, and then they don't know their abstract ID number. So that's why it's important, like I showed earlier, when you have the confirmation, take a screenshot at least of the confirmation page that also includes your abstract ID. Because then if we don't have that abstract ID, it takes us a really long time to find your abstract to change anything. Yeah. And the changes are like really, like people often do this. It's not the content of the abstract that they're changing. It's like the affiliation or authors. But just know also that you'll have a chance to change that once your abstract is accepted. So if it's something like the authors, you can change that later. Anything else? I don't know if that was helpful.
Yes, thank you.
So should I just go ahead with the FAQs?
Yeah, go ahead and go through the FAQ because they're really interesting. If anybody has a question as she's explaining, please interrupt and ask your question.
Okay, so
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead. Yay, question.
It's the same person. The only reason I asked about the making updates before the deadline is because I'm doing like ongoing research, so I'm not sure how things will turn out by the time that the annual meeting comes in. But that's the only reason I asked. So that's why I don't know if you can't make any updates even after the deadline.
No, so this is what
I want to add. Yeah. Just in case I wanted to add something else or subtract something from the abstract.
Well, the abstract that will be accepted is the abstract that's printed in the program, but like it depends, right? So I think this is related to the first question. Must my research project, intervention, or program be complete by the time you submit your abstract? It seems like to me you're going to be submitting a works in progress, which is totally fine. But I think in order for you to be on the safe side, just clearly indicate like that you're going to report generally, you're going to report findings on X hypotheses or findings on the outcomes of this study. And then just, say that. And then you could actually use that notes to organizer section to tell the reviewers that it's a works in progress and that you're still finalizing the results. And that's totally acceptable. Because if anything, like last year, there's a group at UCLA and at UC Merced that received this National Institutes of Minority Health and Health Disparities grant that was really cutting edge on examining state differences in unauthorized immigrant service provision. And we know that the research isn't done. They indicated that, but we want people to know about the project because it's so important. So even if you don't have your final N or your final sample size, you don't have your final calculations, that's just say what you anticipate to find and give us enough information for us to make an assessment of whether or not it's going to be a good project that we want people to know about. But when you remember that when you do your final presentation, whether it's a poster, a roundtable, or the oral, that's where you're going to give your final results anyways. That's where you're going to the meat and potatoes of your project, right? And the method. So just reserve that for then. Just make the abstract informative enough for people to know what you did and what you anticipate to find or what you found if it's complete already.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And then so for number 2, did someone have anything else about that? Okay, so I'll go ahead to number 2. And I've mentioned this before, but I'm going to repeat it again. Do I have to have an active APHA membership by the time I submit an abstract? No, you don't. But you need to be an active member by the time you confirm your attendance to the conference. So if you're not an active APHA member for the current year of the meeting, then your abstract will be automatically withdrawn. And this happened to us last year where people's abstracts, it was just one abstract actually. We confirmed them, we accepted them. By June, actually you should know that you'll know by June, the first week of June, whether or not your abstract is accepted, declined, or waitlisted. So knowing this, as soon as you get that email from APHA, be on the lookout and remember, keep looking out for APHA emails because it'll say your abstract has been accepted. And let's say you're not a member of APHA, you better make sure you become a member quickly because then at a certain date, I believe it's in September, early October, right before the meeting actually happens, they withdraw abstracts. And this happens, they automatically, it's not even us. It's like the computer program is written to just pull the abstract that the person, the lead author doesn't have membership. So just be really aware of that sometimes stuff like this happens where it just pulls the abstract and it's not us per se, it's the system. So just make sure you have your membership active by the time you accept your confirmation or that you confirm your attendance to the conference. I think number 3 is really important. So this year's theme for APHA is preventing violence, which is a wonderful theme. And I think that we should actually, that we need to address more research with the Latinx population about this. However, you don't have to have a project, intervention, or program that is related to preventing violence. So we encourage sessions that we're all about it, but we also know that APHA is a place where we report new research and public health projects. So in order to be considered, just know that also that because we are the Latino Caucus in Public Health, that we really want to move forward also public health issues and research questions that directly affect or are related to Latinx populations. So as long as your abstract is addressing either an issue that directly affects Latinx populations or is related to Latinx populations, we will definitely consider it. And so people have asked us recently in personal emails to Barbara and I, whether or not they can present research about Latin American populations. We're not opposed to it. You just have to indicate in your abstract how it's related to Latinx populations, right? Because we're in a US context. And that how it's implicated, right? Let's say it's about migration of Central Americans to Mexico, but the Central Americans are trying to make their way here and reunite with family, right? Or seek asylum. So yeah, so as long as you make it obvious, you make a small statement about how it addresses public health, locally, nationally, or it's related to Latinx populations, we totally consider the work. We totally consider those abstracts as important. And third, so one thing you should know that we're using a very broad definition of violence. We're considering symbolic violence, right? Like English only state laws. We're considering structural violence. We're considering all types of violence, interpersonal, gender violence. So just know that we're using a very broad approach to violence. So it doesn't have to always be related to the theme. May I submit an abstract that's already been presented at a previous conference or been published? That's actually against the rules. No, your abstract that you submit to our annual meeting should not have been presented or published prior to October 24th, 2020. However, I know you can't help it. Sometimes you have a paper under review and it got published, but really try to present things that you want feedback on or that are works in progress. Yeah, because then it's kind of, yeah, it's not fresh research anymore. It's unfair, yeah, for other people. So yeah, that's one of the rules. And number 5, I did not receive funding to attend APHA meeting. Can I withdraw my abstract? Absolutely, you can withdraw your abstract. We'd be very sad to lose you on our panel, but we also know that life happens or you don't get funding and a plethora of other reasons. So presenters' abstracts that are accepted for presentation, but subsequently, just know that you can withdraw your abstracts. However, if you do it 2 times in a row within the last 5 years, it could actually be excluded from future programs. So try to withhold from withdrawing your abstract too frequently, but we know things happen. And if you want to withdraw your abstract in the same email that you will receive from APHA indicating your acceptance, they will have a link in there for you to withdraw. So it's not a hard process at all to withdraw, but just know that if you do it too much, if you do it 2 or more times within the last 5 years, that it could actually hurt your chances of being accepted in future meetings, for having your abstracts accepted in future meetings. Last question, may you contact the scientific session co-chairs or people listed as program planners on the APHA website? Of course you can. We're here to help you and we want to make sure that we have great sessions. However, just know that individual scientific sessions or program planners, that we can't actually review an abstract for acceptance, right? Because we're not the reviewers. That's a separate process. We have people volunteer to be reviewers. We try to match your abstract to a person in your content area. And then also it would be an unfair advantage truly for other people. However, we could always give you information if your abstract is a good fit for our program. And we could actually give you advice where maybe somewhere else you could submit your abstract if we're not entirely a good fit. And we could always help you clarify the process too. So just know that you could always contact us, but we just can't give you actual track changes or advice on how to work on your abstract. But we can give you advice on the process. And if you think, we can tell you whether it's a good fit or not. And we can maybe recommend you or refer you to another caucus, special interest group or section. And so here at this slide, we have my information at UMass, my email address, and then my scientific co-chair, Barbara Vaquero, and her email is there. And so, yeah, I think that's all I have. I mean, if you guys have any more questions, I'm willing to take some more questions, but I know we're over time.
Thank you so much, Irene. This was fantastic. I really appreciate you going through the whole process for us and also giving us more information in terms of how to make sure our abstract is good to go by the time we submit. Is there any questions so far after this presentation? We're over time, but we're here to, we have a little bit more time to have any questions, so don't feel shy.
Yeah, the submission process was a little bit more time than I thought. But I think it's a good example though to see, because I haven't seen the new system. Yeah, it's pretty thorough though. And the other thing, I think people don't forget your learning outcomes. I think that's a really major, it helps increase the number of people that come to your session. And it really helps us get continuing education credits for our sessions. And we have so much to share. Our work, our public health work is super important. We're the largest racial ethnic minority in the country. And I feel like we're best represented through the caucus and through our sessions. Okay, and here, this is another really golden slide that you should look at. How are people reviewing your abstract? Are these slides going to be available for future use on the Latino Caucus website, Andrea?
Yes, these slides will be on our website as well as will be emailed to you all along with the recording. So I want to say thank you so much for attending our first webinar of the year, 2020. Thank you so much. And Irene, again, if anybody has any questions, they can have an opportunity to contact you or Barbara.
Mm-hmm.
They are phenomenal. I can attest. I ask any questions, they are always quick to respond. So, with that, I would like to end this webinar. And if you all have any questions after the webinar, please feel free to ask us. We're here for you. And make sure you don't do it at the last minute because look how much a time it took just to do the submission. So make sure you prepare before our time.
This is Pietro.
Hi.
Yeah, just very quickly, thank you, Irene. I actually learned a lot. I know you guys have been taking care of this all these years, and I didn't think quite understood, all the work that you guys do and how the process is. So that was very informative and helpful for me, and I really appreciate it. Just in the general, I would think if there are opportunities to, for the team to continue this type of webinar, I think they're great, and also to encourage the students out there to participate in APHA scientific presentations. I think that this is a great opportunity, and the students, we are here to help and facilitate. I mean, particularly Irene and Barbara, who knows, how to work this out better than anybody. So just encourage the students to be more kind of participate more with the Latino caucus, particularly with the scientific committee, and maybe explore other opportunity for these really amazing webinars.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this idea, Andrea. I think it was a great idea. I wish I had this 10 years ago when I started.
And part of the reason why the team and I really wanted to do this is because we had a lot of feedback from people at APHA who would like to present, but they didn't know that they were able to present their work. And so I wanted to make sure that they are able to take what they're doing in the community and submitting an abstract.
One of the things I forgot to mention, and that I actually do, I'm doing it now as I write my grant, is that you could actually see the programs from previous years and see the abstracts. Like if you do a Google search of like APHA annual meeting 2019, it has the program and you could get the links to the abstracts. And that's also a really good example of where to find abstracts, accepted abstracts, right? The ones that have been, the ones that have presented already before. So yeah, so it's always good to look at someone else's stuff too, to kind of get an idea. Oh, am I addressing what I need to address in my abstract for it to be accepted? So that's something I forgot to mention, but I did it this morning for something else. So that's another thing. Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for organizing. Very happy to do.
You're welcome. And if you have any feedback for us, those who have attended, please let us know, and we'll be happy to take into that feedback into consideration for future webinar. I hope you all have a great Monday, and wherever you are in the United States, good morning, have a good morning, or have a good afternoon. We will talk soon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.